I came home from work on a Tuesday afternoon in Scottsdale, Arizona, to find my propane grill completely disassembled and scattered across my patio like someone had taken a wrench to it with malicious intent. My name is Zachary Irving, and I had lived in the Saguaro Springs community for about 8 months. The place was nice enough, modern homes with desert landscaping, but the HOA was run by a woman named Brenda who treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. I had heard stories from my neighbors about her measuring lawn height with a ruler and sending violation notices for slightly faded mailbox paint, but I had mostly stayed under her radar until now. I stood there staring at my Weber grill, which had been perfectly fine when I left for work that morning. The propane tank was disconnected, the regulator was missing entirely, and there was a bright orange notice stuck to my sliding glass door. I grabbed it and read the pompous words printed in bold letters. Violation notice. Improper storage of hazardous materials. Your propane tank and associated equipment have been temporarily confiscated for community safety. Please report to the HOA office within 24 hours to discuss compliance. Brenda Patterson, HOA President. I felt my blood pressure spike. Confiscated. She had come onto my property and dismantled my grill. I looked around my backyard, which was enclosed by a 6-foot block wall. She would have had to open my side gate and walk into my private space to do this. The propane tank was still there actually, just disconnected, but my regulator was gone. That was the part that connected the tank to the grill, and without it, the whole setup was useless. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office number. It rang 4 times before Brenda answered with her characteristic nasally voice. Saguaro Springs HOA, this is Brenda. Brenda, this is Zachary Irving from 4782 Desert Bloom Drive. I just got home and found my grill torn apart and a violation notice on my door. What the hell is going on? Mr. Irving, please watch your language. As stated in the notice, your propane storage was in violation of Community Standards Section 12.4. Propane tanks must be stored out of view from neighboring properties. My backyard is completely enclosed. Nobody can see it. I could see it from the side yard when I performed my inspection. You mean when you trespassed on my property? She made an annoyed clicking sound with her tongue. HOA board members are granted access to perform safety inspections as outlined in your signed agreement. I suggest you review your documents. Where is my regulator? That's a $40 part and I need it back right now. The regulator has been taken to ensure you do not continue using the hazardous setup until proper corrections are made. Once you install a permanent enclosure around the tank and submit photos for approval, your equipment will be returned. I was gripping my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Brenda, you cannot just come onto my property and steal my stuff. That is theft. It is not theft, Mr. Irving. It is confiscation for safety purposes. If you continue with this hostile attitude, I will be forced to fine you for non-compliance. Good day. She hung up on me. I stood there in my backyard, looking at my dismantled grill, trying to process what had just happened. This woman had actually walked onto my property, taken apart my grill, and stolen a component from it. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I went inside and pulled up the HOA agreement I had signed when I bought the house. I read through the entire tedious document, paying special attention to the sections about property access and inspections. The language was vague and mentioned something about HOA representatives being permitted to enter yards for maintenance inspections, but nothing that explicitly gave them the right to confiscate personal property or dismantle anything. I called my neighbor, Derek, who had lived in the community for 5 years. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey Zachary, what's up?" "Derek, has Brenda ever come into your yard and taken anything?" He laughed, but it was bitter. "Oh man, did she get you too? What did she take?" "My propane regulator. Dismantled my whole grill." "Yeah, she did the same thing to the Johnsons last year. Took their regulator and held it hostage until they built some expensive enclosure. The Johnsons ended up just switching to an electric grill because it was cheaper than dealing with her demands." "That's insane. How is she getting away with this?" "Most people just comply because fighting the HOA is expensive and exhausting. She knows that." "Brenda has been president for 6 years, runs unopposed every election because she makes life hell for anyone who challenges her." "Well, I'm not building an enclosure for a propane tank that's already in my enclosed backyard. This is ridiculous." Derek sighed. "Good luck, man. Just be careful. She will make your life miserable if you fight her on this." After hanging up with Derek, I spent the next hour researching Arizona law regarding HOAs and property rights. What I found was interesting. While HOAs did have certain powers, they absolutely could not just take someone's property. That was theft, regardless of what they called it. And more interestingly, I stumbled across Arizona Revised Statute 132812, which dealt with criminal damage and interference with utilities and other services. The statute specifically mentioned that tampering with gas systems could be charged as a felony if it created a danger or was done with criminal intent. My propane system, while used for a grill, was technically a gas system. And Brenda had dismantled it without any certification or authority to do so. I sat back in my chair, considering my options. I could just buy a new regulator for $40 and move on with my life. That was probably the smart thing to do, but the principle of the thing gnawed at me. Brenda had trespassed on my property, stolen my equipment, and was now holding it ransom unless I spent hundreds of dollars on modifications that were not actually required by any legitimate safety code. I decided to go to the HOA office the next morning before work and try one more time to reason with her. If that did not work, I would consider other options. The HOA office was located in a small building near the community entrance, right next to the mailbox cluster. I arrived at 8 in the morning, which was when they supposedly opened, but the door was locked. I waited outside for 20 minutes until Brenda finally showed up, carrying a large coffee and wearing a visor despite the early hour. "Mr. Irving," she said, not sounding pleased to see me. "I told you to make an appointment. You told me to report here within 24 hours. I'm here." She unlocked the door and walked inside without inviting me in. I followed anyway. The office was exactly what I expected. Generic desert paintings on the walls, filing cabinets, a desk with a nameplate that said Brenda Patterson, President in gold letters, and a bulletin board covered in violation notices and HOA memos. Brenda sat down at her desk and gestured vaguely at a chair across from her. "So, have you begun construction on the enclosure?" "No, and I'm not going to. My propane tank is already in a fully enclosed backyard. There is no legitimate safety reason for an additional enclosure. The HOA standards require visual screening of all propane tanks." "From where?" "My yard is surrounded by a block wall. Unless you're trespassing in my yard, you cannot see it." "I have already explained that HOA representatives are permitted to conduct inspections." "Fine, you can inspect it all you want, but you cannot take my property. I want my regulator back today, or I will file a police report for theft." Brenda leaned back in her chair, and I could see she was trying to decide how seriously to take my threat. "Mr. Irving, I do not appreciate being threatened. The regulator will be returned when you comply with community standards. If you file a false police report, I will have grounds to fine you for harassment of HOA personnel. It's not a false report. You took something that belongs to me without my permission. That is literally the definition of theft. It is confiscation for safety purposes. You're not a fire marshal, Brenda. You're not a building inspector. You have no legal authority to confiscate anything, and you definitely have no authority to tamper with a gas system. Her expression changed slightly at that last part. Tamper with a gas system. I simply disconnected a propane tank. You dismantled a gas appliance and removed components from it. In Arizona, that can be considered a felony under certain circumstances. Now she looked genuinely concerned, though she tried to hide it. That is absurd. I was ensuring community safety. Then you should have contacted actual authorities if you thought there was a safety issue. Instead, you took it upon yourself to mess with something you're not qualified to touch. Just give me my regulator back, and we can forget this whole thing. Brenda stood up abruptly. I think you need to leave, Mr. Irving. You are being hostile and making baseless accusations. I will discuss this matter with the HOA board, and we will determine the appropriate next steps. Until then, your violation remains in effect, and you will be fined $50 per day for non-compliance starting Friday. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious. Good day. I left the office furious and seriously considering calling the police right then. But I decided to talk to a lawyer first. I had a buddy from college, Marcus, who practiced law in Phoenix. I called him during my lunch break and explained the situation. Marcus listened to everything and then let out a low whistle. So she actually came onto your property, dismantled your grill, and took the regulator. Yes, and she's refusing to give it back unless you make expensive modifications to your property. That's correct. Zachary, this is textbook theft and possibly extortion. The HOA agreement does not give her the right to confiscate property. At most, she could fine you for violations, but even then, the violation seems questionable if your yard is fully enclosed. That's what I thought. But she keeps insisting she has the authority. She does not. Here is what I would do. First, file a police report for theft. Get it on record. Second, send her a formal demand letter requesting the return of your property within 72 hours. I can draft that for you. Third, if she does not comply, you can file a small claims case and possibly pursue criminal charges if the prosecutor is interested. Would they actually prosecute her? For a $40 regulator? Probably not, unless you really push the angle about tampering with a gas system. That statute you mentioned, 132812, is usually reserved for serious cases, but technically it could apply here. The bigger issue is that she is likely doing this to multiple people, which establishes a pattern of behavior. My neighbor said she did the same thing to another family last year. There you go. If you can document multiple instances, you have a stronger case. But honestly, Zachary, this is going to be a huge hassle. Is it worth it over a $40 part? I thought about it for a moment. It's not about the money, Marcus. It's about her thinking she can just walk onto people's property and do whatever she wants. What's next? She does not like my patio furniture and confiscates that too. I get it. Okay, let me draft that demand letter. I will send it to you by end of day. In the meantime, go file that police report. At minimum, it creates a paper trail. I went to the Scottsdale Police Department during my afternoon break and spoke with an officer at the front desk. I explained the situation, and he directed me to file a non-emergency report online since there was no immediate danger. I did that from my phone in the parking lot, documenting everything. The date, the time I discovered the theft, the missing item, Brenda's admission that she took it, and the attempted extortion regarding the enclosure. By the time I got home that evening, Marcus had sent me the demand letter. It was professional and direct, stating that Brenda had unlawfully taken my property, that I was demanding its immediate return, and that failure to comply within 72 hours would result in legal action. I printed it out, signed it, and drove to Brenda's house that same night. Brenda lived 3 streets over from me in a house that was slightly larger than mine, with a meticulously maintained yard that probably took 20 hours a week to keep perfect. I rang the doorbell, and she answered after a moment, looking surprised and annoyed to see me. "Mr. Irving, this is highly inappropriate. You cannot just show up at my home. I'm serving you with a formal demand letter for the return of my property." I handed her the envelope. "You have 72 hours. She took it reluctantly and opened it right there at the door, reading quickly. Her face turned red as she read. "You actually hired a lawyer over this. You are wasting everyone's time and money. Just return my regulator, Brenda. That is all you have to do. I have already told you the conditions for its return." "There are no conditions. It is my property. You stole it. Return it, or I will pursue every legal option available, including criminal charges. You are being completely unreasonable. I am trying to maintain community standards and safety. Then maintain your own property and leave mine alone." I left her standing in the doorway and walked back to my car. I knew I had probably made things worse, but I did not care anymore. This woman needed to learn she could not just bully people into submission. The next day, I received an email from the HOA board. It was not from Brenda, but from the vice president, a man named Gerald. The email was more diplomatic than anything Brenda had sent, but the message was essentially the same. I needed to comply with the propane enclosure requirement, and once I did, my regulator would be returned. The email also mentioned that I was now being fined $50 per day for the violation, starting that day, which was earlier than Brenda had originally stated. I forwarded the email to Marcus with a note. "They're escalating." He replied within an hour. "File in small claims. I will help you with the paperwork." Also, I did some research. That statute about gas systems is interesting. If you can argue she created a potential safety hazard by improperly disconnecting the gas line, you might have a case for something more serious than simple theft. "Did she have any training or certification to work on gas systems?" I replied. "Definitely not. She is an HOA president with a God complex, not a licensed technician." "Marcus, perfect. Let me make some calls." The 72 hours came and went with no response from Brenda or the HOA. On Saturday morning, I went and bought a new propane regulator from Home Depot for $38 and reconnected my grill. I also set up a security camera in my backyard, pointed at the grill, just in case Brenda decided to come back. The following Monday, I filed a small claims case against both Brenda personally and the HOA for the cost of the regulator, plus the filing fees, plus emotional distress. The amount was not huge, just under $500, but it was the principal. I also received another email from the HOA stating that my fines had now accumulated to $400 for non-compliance, and if I did not pay within 10 days, they would place a lien on my property. This was getting out of hand. I called Marcus again. "They're threatening a lien now." "Can they actually do that?" "Technically, yes, if you're legitimately violating HOA rules and refusing to pay fines. But in this case, the violation is questionable at best, and the fines are excessive and punitive. You can fight it, but it will be a pain. Here is the thing, though, Zachary. I talked to a friend of mine who works in the prosecutor's office. He said if you can make a strong case that Brenda tampered with a gas system without proper certification and created a potential hazard, they might be interested in looking at it, especially if there are other victims. How do I make that case? Document everything. Take photos of how she left the grill after disconnecting it. Get statements from neighbors she's done this to. Show that she has a pattern of tampering with gas systems without any qualifications. The key is demonstrating that her actions could have created a danger. She just disconnected it and took the regulator. I do not know if that created a danger. Think about it. She disconnected the propane line. If she did not do it properly, if there was any gas leak, that is a hazard. Even if she did it correctly, she is not certified to work on gas systems, which means she was operating outside any legal authority to touch that equipment. In Arizona, only licensed technicians are supposed to work on gas systems in certain contexts. I thought about the way my grill had looked when I got home. The connection had been loose, and while I had not smelled gas, it was possible there could have been a leak. Propane was heavier than air, so it would have settled in my yard. If there had been any ignition source, it could have been dangerous. Okay, I will document everything. What about the neighbors she's done this to? Talk to them. Get written statements if they're willing. Over the next few days, I spoke with 3 different neighbors who Brenda had targeted over propane tanks. The Johnsons, who Derek had mentioned. A couple named the Ramirez family who had been forced to move their tank to a different location and build an enclosure at significant expense. And a single guy named Tom who had just gotten rid of his propane grill entirely rather than deal with Brenda's demands. All of them were willing to provide statements about what had happened. The Johnsons were especially helpful because Brenda had actually disconnected their propane line too, just like mine, and had kept their regulator for 3 weeks until they complied. I compiled everything into a detailed report: photos, written statements, copies of violation notices, and my demand letter that Brenda had ignored. I sent it all to Marcus, who forwarded it to his contact at the prosecutor's office. Then I waited. The small claims hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out, and I did not know if anything would come of the criminal angle. In the meantime, Brenda continued her campaign against me. I received another violation notice for having weeds in my gravel landscaping. I went out and looked, and there were 3 small weeds, barely noticeable. I pulled them out and took photos showing the area was clean. 2 days later, another notice, this time claiming my house number was not properly visible from the street. My house number was perfectly visible, a clear set of bronze numbers on my garage. I took more photos. It became clear that Brenda was retaliating against me for fighting back. Every few days, a new bogus violation notice would appear on my door. Derek told me she was doing the same thing to him now too, probably because he had talked to me. She came by yesterday and measured my tree, Derek said, when we talked over the back wall one evening. Said it was overhanging into the common area by 6 inches and needed to be trimmed. It's a mesquite tree, Zachary. They grow at weird angles naturally. She is just harassing me now. I'm sorry, man. I did not mean to drag you into this. It's not your fault. Honestly, I am glad someone is finally standing up to her. Most of us have just been taking it for years. Have you ever thought about running against her for HOA president? Derek laughed. I value my sanity too much. Besides, she controls the proxy votes. She somehow always gets enough proxies to win elections even when people vote against her. I think she goes door to door to people who do not care and collects their proxy forms, then votes herself in. That seems like it should not be legal. Probably is not, but nobody has challenged it. 3 weeks after I filed the small claims case, I got a call from a detective at the Scottsdale Police Department. His name was Detective Ramirez, which was coincidentally the same last name as one of my neighbors, though they were not related. Mr. Irving, I am calling about the report you filed regarding the theft of your propane regulator. I have been reviewing the case, and I'd like to ask you some questions. Sure, absolutely. Can you walk me through exactly what you found when you came home that day? I described everything in detail. The disconnected propane tank, the missing regulator, the grill parts scattered around, the condition of the connection point. And did you smell gas at any point? No, I did not. But I was not really thinking about that at the time. When you reconnected the new regulator, was there any indication the previous disconnection had been done improperly? The connection was loose. I had to tighten it before I could attach the new regulator. I do not know if that is how she left it or if it loosened over time. Understood. And you have statements from other residents saying Miss Patterson did similar things to their propane systems. Yes, 3 other households. I can send you those statements. Please do. Email them to me at the address I am going to text you. Mr. Irving, I want to be straight with you. This is a complicated case. On one hand, the theft aspect is pretty clear-cut. She took your property without permission. On the other hand, proving that her disconnection of the propane system constituted criminal tampering is harder. That statute is usually used in cases where someone maliciously damages utilities or creates an obvious danger. But she is not licensed or certified to work on gas systems, right? Does not that matter? It does, actually. In Arizona, you need a contractor's license to work on propane systems in a professional capacity. Now, homeowners can work on their own systems, but she was not working on her own system. She was working on yours without your permission and without proper licensing. That is where it gets interesting. So, is this something you're going to investigate? I'm already investigating it. I want to talk to Miss Patterson and get her side of the story. I also want to look at the HOA's policies and see what authority they actually claim to have. Give me a week or two. I will be in touch. After I hung up, I felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. This was escalating beyond a simple property dispute. If the detective actually pursued charges, Brenda could be in serious trouble. The next day, I got an angry phone call from Gerald, the HOA vice president. Zachary, what the hell are you doing? The police called Brenda yesterday asking questions about your grill. You are wasting law enforcement resources over a petty dispute. It's not petty when someone steals your property and then extorts you, Gerald. Nobody stole anything. Brenda was doing her job as HOA president. Her job does not include trespassing and theft. If you guys had just given me my regulator back when I asked, none of this would have happened. You are making this so much bigger than it needs to be. The board is meeting tonight to discuss your behavior. You are creating a hostile environment in the community. I'm creating a hostile environment. Brenda is the one who started all this. Just withdraw the police report and the small claims case, and we can work something out. No. I'm done trying to work things out. Brenda needs to face consequences for what she did. Gerald hung up without saying goodbye. That evening, I got a certified letter from the HOA's lawyer. It was a cease and desist letter, demanding I stop harassing Brenda and other board members, and threatening legal action if I continued. It also stated that my accumulated fines were now at $2,000, and if I did not pay within 15 days, they would proceed with placing a lien on my property. I immediately forwarded the letter to Marcus, who called me within minutes. Zachary, this is insane. They're claiming $2,000 in fines. For what, exactly? Bogus violations. Weeds, my house number, the propane tank, all kinds of stuff. This is retaliatory and probably not enforceable, but if they do place a lien, it becomes a real problem when you try to sell or refinance. We need to fight this aggressively. What do you recommend? I am going to send a response to their lawyer laying out all the ways Brenda and the HOA have violated the law and your rights. I am also going to point out that if they proceed with this lien, you will countersue for harassment, abuse of authority, and whatever else I can think of. They are betting you will fold under pressure. We need to show them you will not. Do it. Marcus sent the response letter the next day, and it was glorious. It was 8 pages of detailed legal arguments, citations of Arizona law, and descriptions of Brenda's misconduct. It concluded by demanding the HOA immediately cease all retaliatory actions, return my propane regulator or reimburse me for it, and rescind all fines issued without proper cause. It also warned that failure to comply would result in a countersuit seeking damages and attorney's fees. I did not hear anything from the HOA for a week after that. Then Detective Ramirez called me again. Mr. Irving, I spoke with Miss Patterson yesterday. She confirmed that she did disconnect your propane tank and remove the regulator. Her position is that she was acting in her official capacity as HOA president to address a safety violation. Okay, and I explained to her that HOA authority does not extend to confiscating personal property or tampering with gas systems. She seemed genuinely surprised that her actions could be considered illegal. She maintained that she was just trying to enforce community standards. So what happens now? I am going to submit my findings to the prosecutor's office and recommend charges. At minimum, I think we have a case for theft. The tampering charge is harder to prove because there was no actual damage or danger, but I am going to present it and let them decide. What kind of penalties are we talking about? Theft under $1,000 is a Class 1 misdemeanor in Arizona, punishable by up to 6 months in jail and fines. If they go with the tampering charge and can make it stick as a felony, that is much more serious. 2 to 5 years in prison potentially. But I want to be clear, Mr. Irving. The felony charge is a long shot. Prosecutors generally reserve that for cases involving actual damage or endangerment. I understand. I just want her to face some kind of consequence so she stops doing this to people. That's fair. I will keep you updated. Another week passed, and I received a notice that the small claims hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I prepared all my documentation, printed out photos, organized the statements from neighbors, and made copies of everything. The hearing was held at the Scottsdale courthouse in a small room that looked more like a conference room than a courtroom. Brenda was there with Gerald and another board member whose name I did not know. They had also brought a lawyer, which surprised me because lawyers were not typically necessary in small claims court. The judge was a middle-aged woman named Judge Crawford, who looked tired and slightly annoyed at having to be there. She reviewed the basic facts of the case, then asked me to present my side first. I explained everything. The discovery of my dismantled grill, the missing regulator, the violation notice, Brenda's refusal to return my property, and the subsequent retaliation. I showed photos and submitted the statements from other neighbors who had been treated similarly. Judge Crawford looked at the evidence carefully. Miss Patterson, did you take Mr. Irving's propane regulator? Brenda stood up. Yes, Your Honor, but it was not theft. I was acting in my official capacity as HOA president. The propane tank was in violation of community standards, and I confiscated the regulator to ensure the violation was corrected before the system could be used again. And what authority does the HOA have to confiscate personal property? The HOA covenants give the board authority to enforce community standards and address safety violations. I have reviewed the HOA agreement that Mr. Irving submitted. I do not see anything that explicitly grants you the right to take residents' personal property. Can you point to a specific provision? Brenda's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, may I address this? Go ahead. The HOA agreement includes provisions for enforcement actions when violations occur. While it does not explicitly mention confiscation, the board has interpreted its enforcement authority to include temporary holding of items that constitute violations until the issues are resolved. Judge Crawford did not look impressed. Interpreted by whom? This sounds like an overreach of authority. Miss Patterson, are you certified or licensed to work on propane systems? No, Your Honor, but I simply disconnected the tank. It was not complicated. Regardless of complexity, you accessed Mr. Irving's private property, dismantled his equipment, and took a component of it. Then you refused to return it unless he spent money making modifications you demanded. That sounds like theft and possibly extortion to me. Brenda's face went pale. Your Honor, I was just doing my job. Your job does not include taking people's property. I am ruling in favor of Mr. Irving. The HOA is ordered to reimburse him $40 for the replacement regulator, plus his filing fees, for a total of $175. Additionally, I am ordering the HOA to rescind all fines issued against Mr. Irving related to this matter. Miss Patterson, if you ever do anything like this again, you could face criminal charges. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Good. Case closed. I left the courthouse feeling vindicated. It was not a huge financial victory, but the judge had publicly called out Brenda's behavior and made it clear it was not acceptable. 2 days later, I got a call from an assistant district attorney named Nicole Brennan. Mr. Irving, I am calling about the case Detective Ramirez submitted regarding Brenda Patterson. I have reviewed the evidence and I have decided to file charges. My heart jumped. Really? What charges? We are going with 1 count of theft and 1 count of criminal trespass. I looked at the tampering with a gas system angle, but I do not think we can make that stick without evidence of actual damage or danger. But the theft is clear, and the trespass is clear. She came onto your property without permission and took your belongings. What happens next? She will be formally charged and arraigned. Given the nature of the crimes and her lack of criminal history, she will likely be offered a plea deal, probably probation and restitution, but it will be on her record. And if she does not take the plea, then we go to trial, but I doubt it will come to that. Her own statements to Detective Ramirez essentially constitute a confession. She admitted to taking your property. Her defense that she had authority to do so does not hold up legally. She will likely plead out. Thank you. This means a lot. Just doing my job, Mr. Irving. People cannot just take the law into their own hands, even if they are on an HOA board. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. Brenda was arrested at her home, which I only knew about because Derek told me he saw police cars outside her house one morning. She was released the same day on her own recognizance, but the damage to her reputation was done. Word spread through the neighborhood fast. I started getting calls and messages from neighbors I had barely spoken to before. People who had been terrorized by Brenda for years were suddenly coming out of the woodwork to share their stories. A woman named Patricia told me Brenda had forced her to repaint her entire house because the color was supposedly not approved, even though it matched the approved palette exactly. A man named Robert said Brenda had fined him $500 because his Christmas lights were up 2 days past the January 1st deadline, even though he had been in the hospital with pneumonia. The more stories I heard, the more I realized Brenda had been running the HOA like a dictatorship for years, and everyone had just been too afraid or exhausted to fight back. There was an emergency HOA meeting called for the following week. I attended, along with what looked like 100 other residents. The community clubhouse was packed. Gerald opened the meeting looking uncomfortable. "Thank you all for coming. As you may have heard, Brenda Patterson has been charged with theft and trespass related to an incident with one of our residents. The board has asked for her resignation, and she has submitted it. We are now looking for volunteers to fill the president position until the next election." People started shouting questions. Why was she allowed to abuse her authority for so long? Who is going to refund all the bogus fines she issued? What about the money we spent on modifications she forced us to make? Gerald looked overwhelmed. "I understand there are a lot of concerns. The board is committed to reviewing all recent enforcement actions and addressing any issues that arose from Brenda's misconduct." A woman stood up in the back. "Gerald, you were vice president this whole time. You enabled her behavior. The whole board needs to resign." There were shouts of agreement. Gerald tried to restore order, but the meeting devolved into chaos. Eventually, he just gave up and adjourned the meeting early. I left feeling a mix of satisfaction and concern. Brenda was facing consequences, which was good. But the HOA was in disarray, and I had no idea how long it would take to fix the culture she had created. Brenda's arraignment happened 3 weeks later. I was not required to attend, but Nicole Brennan called me afterward to update me. She took the plea deal. 1 year probation, 100 hours community service, and she has to pay you $500 in restitution for the cost of the regulator plus your time and aggravation. What about the criminal record? She pled guilty to 1 count of theft, a Class 1 misdemeanor. It will be on her record. The trespass charge was dropped as part of the deal. If she successfully completes probation, she can petition to have it reduced or set aside, but it will still show up on background checks. Good. Thank you for pursuing this. You are welcome. Honestly, this case was a nice change of pace. Most of what I deal with is way more depressing. Taking down a power-hungry HOA president is almost fun. Over the next few months, the HOA went through a complete overhaul. Gerald and the other board members resigned after the disastrous meeting. A group of younger residents who actually cared about fairness stepped up to run the HOA. They immediately suspended all outstanding fines pending review, revised the enforcement policies to prevent abuse, and instituted a transparent process for violations that included an appeal mechanism. Brenda became a pariah in the neighborhood. I saw her a few times from a distance, usually getting into her car quickly and avoiding eye contact with everyone. She put her house on the market within a month of the plea deal and moved out 6 weeks later. Derek told me she moved to another city entirely, probably to escape the shame. I got a check for $500 from Brenda's lawyer as part of the restitution. I donated it to a local legal aid organization that helped people fight HOA abuse. Life in Saguaro Springs slowly returned to normal, but it was a better normal. People were not afraid of bogus violation notices anymore. The new board focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. Derek organized a neighborhood barbecue, and I brought my grill, propane tank, and all, prominently displayed in the common area. Nobody said a word about it. I kept the security camera in my backyard, though, just in case. You never know when another Brenda might show up, thinking she has the right to mess with other people's property. The whole experience taught me an important lesson about standing up to bullies, even when they hide behind official titles and policies. Brenda thought she was untouchable because she was HOA president. She thought nobody would challenge her because fighting was too hard and too expensive. She was wrong. It cost me time, stress, and some money, but it was worth it. Not just for me, but for all the neighbors who had suffered under her reign and were too worn down to fight back. Sometimes one person willing to make a stand can change an entire community. I also learned that tampering with gas systems, even something as seemingly minor as disconnecting a propane grill, can have serious legal consequences if you are not the property owner and do not have proper authority. Brenda thought she was just enforcing HOA rules. She did not realize she was committing crimes. The Arizona statute about tampering with gas systems is on the books for good reasons. Gas leaks can cause explosions, fires, and deaths. Even if someone thinks they know what they are doing, unless they are properly licensed and have legal authority to work on a system, they should not touch it. Brenda learned that lesson the hard way. I ran into Tom one day at the grocery store, the neighbor who had gotten rid of his propane grill entirely after Brenda harassed him about it. "Hey, Zachary, I heard what happened with Brenda. That was amazing. I wish I had fought back when she came after me. It's not too late." "You could get a new grill," he laughed. "You know what? I think I will. I miss cooking on propane. Electric is just not the same. Do it, man. And if anyone gives you trouble about it, let me know." "Will do. Hey, thanks for standing up to her. You made this neighborhood a better place." That conversation stuck with me. I had not set out to be a hero or a reformer. I just wanted my $40 regulator back. But sometimes small acts of resistance against petty tyranny can have ripple effects you do not anticipate. The new HOA board reached out to me a few months later and asked if I would be interested in joining as a member. I politely declined. I had no desire to get involved in HOA politics. I just wanted to live in my house, grill on my patio, and not be hassled by power-hungry neighbors. But I did start attending the monthly HOA meetings, just to keep an eye on things and make sure the board stayed accountable. A dozen other residents started doing the same thing. The meetings were boring, but it was important. Transparency and accountability were the only ways to prevent another Brenda from taking over. Derek and I became good friends through all this. We started having regular backyard cookouts, alternating between his place and mine. His wife Maria was a fantastic cook, and she taught me how to make carne asada properly. We would invite other neighbors, and slowly the community started to feel like an actual community instead of a collection of people living in fear of the HOA. One evening, about 6 months after everything had settled down, Derek and I were sitting on my patio with beers, watching the sunset over the desert hills. "You ever regret buying in an HOA community?" Derek asked. I thought about it. Sometimes. But honestly, the problem was not the HOA itself. It was Brenda. With the right people running it, an HOA can actually be helpful. They maintain the common areas, organize community events, handle stuff that individual homeowners should not have to worry about. True. But man, when it goes wrong, it goes really wrong. Yeah. That's why people need to pay attention and get involved. If nobody is watching, you get someone like Brenda who just runs wild with power. Cheers to that. Derek raised his beer bottle and I clinked mine against it. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. My grill was in the corner of the patio, fully assembled and functional, the propane tank connected with a brand new regulator that nobody had messed with. It was such a simple thing, but it represented something bigger. It represented the right to live in your own home without someone else dictating absurd rules and stealing your stuff. I did eventually hear through the neighborhood gossip network what happened to Brenda after she moved. Apparently, she tried to join the HOA board in her new community and was rejected after they did a background check and found her misdemeanor conviction. She tried to explain it away as a misunderstanding, but the conviction spoke for itself. She had abused her authority, stolen someone's property, and faced criminal charges for it. I did not take any pleasure in her continued suffering, but I did think it was appropriate that her actions had lasting consequences. Too often, people in positions of minor authority abuse that power and get away with it because their victims do not have the resources or energy to fight back. Brenda had counted on that, and she had been wrong. The restitution check was not just about the money. It was a legal acknowledgement that what she did was wrong, that she had harmed me, and that she had to make it right. The criminal conviction was society saying that her behavior was not acceptable and would not be tolerated. I kept all the documentation from the case in a folder in my filing cabinet. The police report, the demand letter from Marcus, the small claims judgment, the restitution order, all of it. I did not look at it often, but it was there if I ever needed it. A complete record of what had happened and how it had been resolved. One afternoon, I got a LinkedIn message from someone I did not know. Her name was Nancy Brooks, and she lived in a different state entirely. "Hi, Zachary. I hope you do not mind me reaching out. I found your story about the HOA president who stole your propane regulator. I am dealing with a similar situation in my neighborhood, and I was wondering if you could offer any advice on how to fight back." I messaged her back with some basic guidance. Document everything, know your rights, do not be afraid to escalate to authorities if necessary. Find a lawyer if you can afford one, and do not back down just because fighting is hard. She thanked me profusely and said she was going to file a police report against her HOA president, who had confiscated her patio furniture because it was supposedly the wrong color. Over the next year, I heard from a handful of other people in similar situations. Apparently, overzealous HOA board members confiscating property was more common than I had realized. I became an accidental expert on fighting HOA overreach, and I was happy to help people who were going through what I had gone through. Some of them won their battles, some of them did not. But all of them appreciated having someone who understood what they were dealing with and could offer practical advice. The Saguaro Springs HOA became a model for how to run a fair and reasonable community association. The new board published clear guidelines for violations, created an appeals process, and limited the president's authority so that no single person could make unilateral decisions about enforcement actions. They also banned board members from entering private property without explicit written permission from the homeowner, which should have been obvious but apparently needed to be spelled out. A local news station even did a story about the HOA reform, though they did not mention my name or Brenda's specifically. The story focused on how communities could prevent HOA abuse and what residents could do if they faced similar situations. I watched it with Derek and Maria, and we all laughed at how serious they made it sound. "You are famous now," Maria joked. "The great HOA warrior." "I just wanted my regulator back," I said. "I never asked for any of this." "That's what makes it a good story," Derek said. Regular guy stands up to petty tyrant and wins. It is a classic tale. I had to admit, it did feel good to have won. Not just the legal victory, but the larger cultural change in the neighborhood. People were happier. The HOA was functional without being oppressive, and Brenda was gone. My propane grill is still working perfectly. I use it at least twice a week, and every time I fire it up, I think about how close I came to just accepting Brenda's theft and buying a new regulator without fighting back. If I had done that, she would have kept victimizing people, the HOA would have remained toxic, and nothing would have changed. Standing up for yourself matters, even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard. Bullies count on people being too tired or too scared to fight back. When you do fight back, when you refuse to accept abuse and demand accountability, it makes a difference. I hope Brenda learned something from the experience. I hope she realized that authority comes with responsibility and that abusing power has consequences. But even if she did not learn anything, at least she was stopped. At least the people in Saguaro Springs do not have to deal with her anymore. And my propane regulator, the one I bought to replace the one she stole, is still connected to my grill on my back patio in my private yard that nobody has the right to enter without my permission. It is a small thing, but it is mine, and that matters. The whole experience reinforced my belief in the legal system, despite its flaws. Yes, it took time and effort and some money. Yes, it was frustrating and stressful, but in the end, the system worked. The police investigated, the prosecutor filed charges, the judge ruled fairly, and the person who committed crimes faced appropriate consequences. That is how it is supposed to work. That is why we have laws and courts and procedures. Not every case turns out this way, I know that. But mine did, and I am grateful for it. Life in Scottsdale continued. The seasons changed, the desert bloomed in spring, the summer heat became unbearable, and then fall brought relief. The HOA hummed along quietly in the background, doing its job without drama or controversy. I still live in my house on Desert Bloom Drive. I still grill on my patio with my propane setup that nobody has touched since I installed the new regulator. The security camera is still there, more out of habit now than actual concern. Derek and Maria are still my closest neighbors and good friends. The community barbecues continued as a regular thing. Tom got a new propane grill like he said he would. The neighborhood actually felt like a neighborhood. And Brenda, wherever she is now, hopefully learned that being HOA president does not give you the right to steal people's property or tamper with their gas systems. If she did not learn that lesson, well, at least she is not in Saguaro Springs anymore making life miserable for the residents here. The whole saga, from the day I found my grill dismantled to the day Brenda moved out, took about 9 months. 9 months of stress and frustration and anger, but also 9 months that ultimately made the community better. Would I do it again if I had to? Absolutely. Would I recommend others stand up to HOA abuse? Without question. Is it easy? No. But it is worth it. My $40 propane regulator ended up being the catalyst for criminal charges, HOA reform, and a complete change in neighborhood culture. That is a pretty good return on investment. And that is the story of how HOA Karen stole my propane regulator and learned the hard way that tampering with gas systems is a felony, or at least can be prosecuted as one if you push the right buttons and have the right evidence. Justice was served, the community was improved, and I can grill in peace.